Does the soul really exist? Did Dr. Duncan McDougall really weigh the human soul? What about the millions upon millions of people who have claimed to have had an afterlife experience? Do we just waking up and go to work and protect the ones we love and provide for them? But at the end of it all, we are all heading into oblivion? The 21 grams experiment refers to a scientific study published in 1907 by Duncan McDougall, a physician from Haverhill, Massachusetts. McDougall hypothesized that souls have physical weight and attempted to measure the mass lost by a human when the soul departed the body. McDougall attempted to measure the mass change of 6 patients at the moment of death. One of the 6 subjects lost 3/4 of an ounce, 21.3 grams. McDougall's experiment was not accepted in mainstream science, which is unsurprising, because you can't just put the soul under a microscope and study it. And unless that day happens, it will never be accepted by mainstream science. McDougall's experiment got ridiculed and laughed at. But should we be laughing when it comes to the existence of the soul? I will attempt to prove to you that it's no laughing matter. And the fact is, the soul does indeed exist. I would like to begin by deconstructing the argument by critics who state that near-death experiences can be explained by the brain, specifically that the brain remains active for up to 8 minutes after clinical death. The fact is, it doesn't matter how long the brain stays active after death, it still can't explain away near-death experiences, and I will explain exactly why the critics can't use this argument any longer. I will go even further to prove that even though there is no scientific evidence for the basis, that the near-death experience is brought on by the potent serotonergic dimethyltryptamine, other words known as DMT. I will also deconstruct this argument simply because the critics like to claim that DMT is also the cause of near-death experiences, but you will soon see why. This has no scientific basis, and even if DMT was released at the point of death, it still can't account for near-death experiences, as you will soon see why. And we will also look at what other things the critics tend to say to try and explain away near-death experiences. Let us begin and be prepared to be amazed. I want you to imagine lying in bed sleeping one night, and you begin to get the most excruciating pain in your chest. You are unable to take a breath, and you begin to slowly lose consciousness. The ambulance arrives and the paramedics rush to save your life. By this stage, you have lost all consciousness, and now your life is on the line. The paramedics rush you into the back of the ambulance. By this stage, your heart has stopped. They begin giving you chest compressions on you in the back of the ambulance to try and start your heart again. You are rushed to hospital in the back of the ambulance, but something strange begins to happen. You begin to see the most beautiful light. And the light is welcoming, and you feel pure love coming from the light. You slowly move towards it. You can't begin to express how much joy and love you feel that's coming from the light. Suddenly, you have reached the end of the tunnel that has brought you to the most amazing place you've ever seen. You see birds, dogs, children, cats, and all types of beautiful animals. Meanwhile, the surgeons are trying to save your life. Then suddenly, you're back in the light. You are asked if you would like to return, but you are overwhelmed with the peace and love where you are. But you are reminded that you still have things to accomplish in the world. You agree to come back. The next thing you are aware of is being in the corner of the room. You are able to see the operating tools that are being used to try and bring you back to life. You are even able to see the exact time the doctor looked at his watch and the exact words he writes in his notebook. All the while, you are still clinically dead. When they are finally able to bring you back to life, you tell the doctor exactly everything you saw when you left your body. But the doctors are taught in medical school that such experiences are hallucinations. Without even questioning the reality of your experience, they just put it down to possible brain activity while clinically dead. Then you begin to explain how you saw the surgeon's tools and explain exactly what they looked like and which surgeon used which tools. You also go on to explain exactly what the doctor wrote on his notebook, and the exact time that was on his watch when he looked. Now imagine being blindfolded. Now try and have a go at explaining exactly what is going on in the room, and also explain the exact time that I look at my watch and the exact words I write in my notebook, along with the exact tools that set out in front of me. The fact is, you couldn't even explain to me all those details correctly, even though your brain is fully functional. The simple fact is, being clinically dead and having brain activity can't account for a near-death experience. Neither can DMT being released at the time of death. Even though it's not proven to be a fact that DMT is even released when someone dies. Also, a lack of oxygen to the brain, nor hallucinations can account for such accuracy when a patient is clinically dead. You are probably thinking, but wait, no one has ever actually went through clinical death and reported back such accuracy. But you would be wrong in thinking that. Our first case that we will look at is that of Pam Reynolds. Pam Reynolds was an American singer-songwriter from Atlanta, Georgia, USA, whose near-death experience is one of the most frequently cited in the literature. The experience seemingly occurred during a complete shutdown of her brain and body functions that had been instigated purposely to allow delicate surgery on a brain aneurysm. It included accurate views of the operating room and equipment, hyper-awareness, visions of light, and interactions with deceased relatives. Her case is regarded by many as convincing evidence of survival, since her vital signs were monitored continuously, providing certainty that she was clinically dead at the time. Before we hear the testimony from the surgeons and Pam Reynolds herself, we must first understand what she went through to become clinically dead and experience an extraordinary near-death experience. Pam Reynolds reported to her physician that she was experiencing symptoms of dizziness, loss of speech, and difficulty in moving parts of her body. Her physician referred her to a neurologist, and a CAT scan later revealed that Reynolds had a large aneurysm in her brain, close to the brainstem. Because of the difficult position of the aneurysm, Reynolds was predicted to have no chance of surviving surgery for its removal. As a last resort, Robert F. Spetzler, a neurosurgeon of the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona, decided that a rarely performed procedure, known as hypothermic cardiac arrest, could improve Reynolds' chances of surviving. Surgical removal of the aneurysm. During this procedure, also known as a standstill operation, Reynolds' body temperature was lowered to 50 F10C, her breathing and heartbeat stopped, and the blood drained from her head. Her eyes were closed with tape and small earplugs with speakers were placed in her ears. You will now hear the surgeons and doctors testifying that Pam Reynolds was indeed clinically dead while being monitored closely. And yet she was able to say exactly what took place while clinically dead.
In the process of my study, I went and interviewed Dr. Spetzler and looked at his operative report, and I found that what she saw from her out-of-body experience seemingly corresponded very accurately to what had actually occurred. She looked at the bone saw that was being used to cut open her skull. I didn't have any idea what this thing looked like. She described it as an electric toothbrush, which I thought was ridiculous. I had to send off for a picture of this saw to Fort Worth, Texas, to confirm whether or not what she said it looked like actually was accurate. And I was astounded when I saw the picture. It indeed does resemble an electric toothbrush.
I don't think that the observations she made were based on what she experienced as she went into the operating room theater. They were just not available to her. For example, the drill and so on, those things are all covered up. They're not visible. They were inside their packages. You really don't begin to open until the patient is completely asleep so that you maintain a sterile environment.
She also heard a conversation during the operation between Dr. Spetzler and the cardiovascular surgeons who were cutting into her legs to hook her up to the heart-lung machine. When the cardiac surgeon incised her right groin, she found that her veins and arteries were too small and she had to go over to the left side, and there was some conversation at the time between the doctors. Pam accurately recalled hearing that conversation.
At that stage in the operation, nobody can observe, hear in that state. And I find it inconceivable that your normal senses, such as hearing, let alone the fact that she had clicking modules in each ear, that there was any way for her to hear those through normal auditory pathways.
So again, this is very suggestive of the fact that there was some sort of extrasensory perception or out-of-body experience or whatever occurring at the time that was allowing Pam to hear accurately and seemingly see accurately what was going on in the operating room at the time. This is a classic near-death experience occurring under extremely monitored medical conditions where every known vital sign and basically every clinical sign of life and death was being monitored at the time. And that's what makes her case so remarkable and so valuable to us.
I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know how it's possible for it to happen, considering the physiological state she's in. At the same time, I have seen so many things that I can't explain that I don't want to be so arrogant as to be able to say that there's no way it can happen.
Pam's case points to the fact that somehow she was able to retain coherent perception and memory whilst clinically dead. This suggests the possibility of some kind of mind-brain separation.
When the heart is stopped and the brain is not functioning, it really is not functioning. There can be no memory. It can't be remembering experiences in some way which are occurring at that time because the memory circuits don't work. So when the near-death experiencer talks about these memories of going out of their body and seeing the resuscitation process, it's difficult for our current neuroscience to understand how this could happen in using a memory system which is defunct.
Now that we have heard first accounts from Pam Reynolds' surgeons, let's now go to Pam Reynolds and she will explain what she saw and witnessed while clinically dead.
The first really vivid memory I had was of a sound. I heard a sound and it was distinct. It reminded me of sort of being in a dentist's office. And I remember wondering what that sound was. The sound began to pull me.
With very fine instruments, we separate tiny little blood vessels that are adherent to this balloon.
First sound, then sight. Pam becomes an observer of her own operation.
I was sort of looking down at the body, and I knew it was my body, but I was not at all attached to it. I was not that body. I was whatever was looking down at it. And I remember in his hand there was a tool that looked to me like the handle on my electric toothbrush. And it had bits, and they were kept in this case that looked very similar to the case that my father kept his sockets in.
Then something else caught Pam's attention.
And I saw a very tiny pinpoint of brilliant white light way off in the distance. And it began to pull me. And I distinctly heard my grandmother call me. And I remember thinking, I wonder if I deserve to be here. I'm not a perfect person. And my grandmother said to me, you were a child sent away to school. And as a child, we expected that you would spill your milk. It's the manner in which you clean it up that gives us cause for pride. I asked what was the nature of the light when they told me that I would not be allowed to go in. I said, is the light God? And it was communicated to me, no, that the light is not God. The light is what happens when God breathes. And at that point I remember thinking, I'm standing in the breath of God.
But in the operating room, the surgery is coming to an end.
And I was again looking down at my body, and I saw it as a dead thing, and I didn't want to get in it.
The surgical team warms Pam's body and shocks her heart.
The tunnel was pushing and the body was pulling, and the sensation of it was rather like diving into a pool full of ice water. It hurt. And I came back with a jolt.
Dr. Spetzler is happy to report Pam's 10-hour surgery is a success, but he's confounded by what she tells him about her experience.
It struck me that this was incredibly perplexing and not understandable with what we know about the brain. Without any brainwave activity, it is inconceivable to me that the brain can receive, internalize, and maintain a memory. But at the same time, I think it is the height of egotism to say something can't happen just because we can't explain it.
This is the experience of Pam Reynolds. This is the experience of millions of people from around the world. And at the same time, this is why a lack of oxygen, the so-called DMT, brain activity, and hallucinations just don't cut it when trying to explain near-death experiences and the accuracy of what people see, hear, and experience while clinically dead. Your loved ones who have died have not ceased to exist, but instead they still know who you are, and looking at the evidence, you can be sure that you will see them again. To be featured on one of our videos, email officialsoulacademy@gmail.com.